miss the memo that if we just do better and work harder, that our lots in life would change. Why do other ethnic minorities and immigrants seem to fare better here in the United States than the Black descendants of enslaved people? And are the travails and the negative things that we experience as a result of racism and inequity amplified by our negative mindsets and limiting beliefs? I don't know, but we're talking about it after the break.
Brokers, welcome to another episode of Brokish, where we talk about the unbelievable ish this country has done to keep us broke. Now here are your hosts, Amber and Erica.
I'm Amber.
And I'm Erica.
And today on Brokish, we are talking about model minorities.
Will you stop? You are not anybody's model minority. If
you wanna be somebody, if you wanna go somewhere.
Anyway, please, let's save it. Y'all know we are continuing down the path of tearing down the bad messages that were shared by our least favorite capitalist. And so, yes, that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. But Amber, before we do that, what have you been doing since we last got together with the brokers?
Well, you know, child, Tommy don't got no job. So I just been over here. I've been being a housewife. And if I can just confess, y'all, it's like super ghetto.
You'll like it.
Sometimes I wonder, do I like my kids? Do I like my man? I like them, but do I like them enough to like be, around them all the time? Like thinking about them all the time? Packing lunches and snacks all the time? I love them, but it's been a lot, okay? It's been a lot. I've been a field trip chaperone. I've been a volunteer in the library at the elementary school.
So are you telling me you just started being an involved mother like after you lost your job, but you weren't before? Because I do all those things and I got 3 jobs.
Girl, bye. Anyway, so yes, I was doing it before, but like classroom mom, absolutely not. I do one field trip a year with everybody, but the whole we need somebody to come and, put the Grinch bags together for the holiday party was not my ministry while I was working. Okay.
But you're liking it. Okay. Well, we, like you, have been we have been in the frozen tundra.
Mm-hmm.
I have been so disappointed because it has been like snowing. Yesterday it snowed and snowed and snowed and didn't stop snowing. And while I like snow days, because actually it's been great with my kids being home because they have cooked me food, Amber. They have cooked me meals.
She's the only housewife I know that make her family do all the housework. Okay. Had them babies cooking meals.
Made me some amazing smash burgers. When I tell you, see, I don't eat beef, right? So it's hard to get a turkey smash burger anywhere, but that girl put her good work in. And when I tell you today she just made some oatmeal cookies. And I'm like, it's a blessing to have talented children. And I don't take that for granted, but I will say that my training program that I put these children through, it is working. It is paying dividends because they are out here. But the sad part is, Amber, that my daughter was, she's learning how to drive. And so my husband's teaching her how to drive, but she was in an accident. And so we've been trying to look for a car, and because it's been frozen, then we can't look for a car. And school starts next week for me, and I need a car. And so I have to try to spend the next 2 days trying to find one. So anyway.
Good luck with that. I don't know. I always hate when young drivers get into accidents because that's so scary. And that's one of those things that you cannot put it out of your mind, especially when it's happened so early when you start to drive. So that made me sad.
I know, poor baby.
I know that's very scary. Very scary.
And for him too, like being with her when that happened.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so that means she's not getting her practice in. And also now I got to find a new car, which is proving to be a challenge. But you know what? We keep moving. We keep it moving.
Yes.
And today we're going to keep it moving with a guest, y'all.
Yes.
And I'm so excited because our guest today was referred to us by a friend to the show, Dr. Candy Andrews. So shout out to Candy. Burr, burr, burr. I don't have sound effects, but shout out to him.
You need to
And
retire that one though. Like, oof.
that's what they do with the air horn. You know, when people go burr, 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 you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so I'm very excited for us to have our guest with us today, and she is Dr. Patrice Sims. She's a US-based sociologist whose research examines racial construction, perception, and identity, and interrogates how knowledge about race and racism is produced and disseminated. She's the author of 4 books. Sis is writing, okay? The Fallacies of Racism, which came out this year, Mixed Race in the US and UK from 2020, The Sociology of Harry Potter from 2012, and The Inequality of Racial Perception, which is her forthcoming book. She's also written over a dozen articles and book chapters and has been invited to speak at universities and corporations and for international and national news outlets. And Dr. Sims is the recipient of the 2020 Stanford M. Lyman Distinguished Book Award from the Mid-South Sociological Association and the 2021 Distinguished Contributions to Teaching Award from the Southern Sociological Society. She holds degrees in sociology from Hampton University, Vanderbilt University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She previously taught at UW River Falls and is presently an associate professor at, but of course does not speak on behalf of, the University of Alabama at Huntsville. Yes, for disclosures. Dr. Sims, welcome to Brokish.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we are so pleased that you accepted our invitation, especially on such short notice. But if you haven't figured it out, Amber and I are of Southern and Baptist tradition. So we got to start by asking you who you are and who your people are.
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, I am a Black American of slave descent. I am a Catholic. I'm a Southerner, born and raised in Tennessee. I'm a runner. I finished my first marathon last year, so I was very excited about that.
Look at you.
Prior to running the marathon and distances, I was a sprinter. So I did run track at Hampton, and then also 1 year at Vanderbilt, I did the hurdles. Now I am a dance mom. So I have an 11-year-old and she is a competitive dancer. So that keeps me really busy. I love to read. I love to write. Cookies are one of the things that I just have a weakness for. I'm really terrible at spelling. And yeah, it's kind of a me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, we are so glad to have you here to talk to us today and to help dispel some of the myths that our unfriend, I don't want to say enemy, but my nemesis, when he came on the show and talked about. So we're going to do that. And so, Dr. Sims, like we said, you have a new book, The Fallacies of Racism. And in the book itself, you talk about how you came to write the book, its origin story. But for the brokers who have not yet had a chance to read your book, can you tell us more about the book in general and how you came to write it?
Yes. So the book in general pulls on what I call fallacies. And so fallacies are, if anyone's kind of heard of them from psychology and kind of pop culture, like the gambler's fallacy. If I just keep pulling the slot machine, then I'm bound to win. Math doesn't work that way. You're not bound to win. And so I was teaching introductory level race courses in Wisconsin when I was a graduate student. And the textbook I was using had 5 fallacies of racism, just kind of in the very first few pages to get on the same page to help the students then get ready to study race. And so I never really paid those too much attention because I thought rather than focusing on what, something isn't, obviously we should tell students this is what things are. And so I was thinking we should show them good data and we should give them, good analysis. And that was working a little bit, but it wasn't really reaching all of the students. And then I got an evaluation one time where a student said he would not, or she, or they would not believe a word I said, no matter how many statistics I shoved down their throat. And that was a real aha moment for me.
Sure.
That in a science class, no less, the telling of here's an accurate picture of what the world is. I mean, that's descriptive social science right there, an accurate picture of the world, that wasn't going to reach some students. And so I started to think, okay, how do I reach those students? The guests that you had on, how do we reach people that are holding these particular views that we know are empirically inaccurate, that we know stem from a place of bias? How do we reach them? And so I revisited those 5 fallacies at the beginning of that textbook. And I said, okay, I'm going to start focusing on these in class. So I started focusing on those, and 2 things happened. The first thing was more students started to get it. More students started to understand, oh, okay, people on welfare aren't just lazy, like, got it. So they started to understand more. But simultaneously, as they stopped with the myths that say, oh, your Blacks didn't get the memo, your previous guest had said, as they gave up those and realized the inaccuracy of those, new ones took their place. And so I'm reading student papers, I'm reading student essays, and now they're no longer saying, well, there's inequality because Blacks didn't get the memo. Now they're saying, well, there's inequality because they just won't do the application because their self-esteem is too low. It's like, okay, you've just traded one thing for the other. And that's when I realized there were more of these. And I realized that it wasn't just the content, but it was a mode of thinking. And so that's what the book is about. The book uses 12 examples, but what it's really showing is that there's this mode of thinking that is rooted in ignorance, that's rooted in misinformation, that's rooted in bias. And that mode of thinking, when we allow it unchecked to flourish and apply to racism, all it does is help racism perpetuate.
Which is really wild to think about. I just started, you don't know this, I just started teaching for the first time last semester. So I'm teaching social problems. And of course, when we're teaching social problems, we're trying to get the students to think about these social problems, right? That they see and experience every day. And so it's interesting, but unsurprising how they would be like, I don't care how much data, how much information, how much proof you have, because my views are my views. And so I'm trying not to just give up. So I'm using your story as a way to like encourage me to keep going in spite of that. But you mentioned our guest and his memo. So I'm going to read the quote from his show that he talked about. He said, Black people, Native American Indians, and poor whites out of 200 plus ethnic groups in America are the only 3 groups that never got the memo on money. Not all Blacks. Black Nigerians got the memo. Black Jamaicans got the memo. Black South Africans got the memo. They come here and start businesses and have higher self-esteem. Anyway, there was a whole lot there. But in your work, do you grapple with the idea that Black people can sometimes be the ones who sort of traffic in this anti-Black ideology?
Yes. Chapter 3 of this current book is called The Token Fallacy, and it looks at the erroneous kind of perception that unless racism is perpetuated by all white people and anti-racism is pushed by all people of color, then these things can't actually exist. And so what I do in that book is I focus both on white tokens and people of color as tokens. And on the side of people of color as tokens, you know, I quote Dr. Andrews, Kehinde Andrews, who has pointed out in his work, there have always been, you know, porch slaves. There have always been those tribal chiefs that were willing to work with the colonizers in their home country. These folks have always been there. And so the seed to understanding them is actually in what your guest said. He corrected himself and said, not all Blacks. And then he proceeded to talk about different ethnicities, which means at some level we can understand that the reason that we don't have a monolith among any race is because there's other differences. There's ethnic differences, there's gender differences, there's disability differences, there's sexual orientation differences. There's all of these differences that provide people with different life experiences, which then can lead to different understandings as you're positioned differently within the society. So that chapter really looks at how tokens get held up. Some tokens get held up as proof that, you know, racism doesn't exist. So if we have people of color, such as your previous guest, saying, oh, well, Black people just didn't get the memo, Native Americans just didn't get the memo, and it's their fault because everybody else is doing fine, as the thesis of the book shows, what that does is allows the inequality just to continue. It allows the inequality to continue. And that's the function of these particular fallacies. And they can be perpetuated by anyone. As your guest, of course, shows.
I also think it's interesting how the fallacy overlooks the fact that systemically there's a different response to immigrants than there are to the Black descendants of slaves. And so one of the things that you talk about is sort of what happens when we create this lumping together, right? You know, where we just sort of put everybody in a bowl together. You really start having this hyper focus on individuals that ignores the way that the system is responding, that even when people aren't responding that way, you're discounting the fact that there is a different systemic response that happens, particularly with Black immigrants from places like Nigeria, from places like South Africa, that is different distinctly from the systemic response to the Black descendants of slaves.
Yes, I love that you brought that up. That's actually going to be a through line in my next book, The Inequality of Racial Perception.
Next book.
Yeah. So that one is going to look at how, when we are perceiving people by race, again, keeping in mind that we all have different ethnicities and genders and sexual orientations and other axes as well, but there are different kind of, from a psychological perspective, different schema, different packets of information that go along with that. And so when we think about racial stereotypes, the stereotype of a Nigerian is very different than the stereotype of a descendant of sharecroppers in Mississippi. And so those stereotypes get applied when people look at someone, right? We all think we can look at someone and be like, oh yeah, they're Nigerian, they're Ghanaian, okay, that person's from Egypt, this person's American. And to an extent, because we have so codified this, people do have various levels of skills at actually being able to kind of pick and understand, identify where people are with high probabilities. But the issue is that there's inequality built into that. And so it's not just that we're seeing, oh, you look like you're Nigerian, but now here comes all of the Nollywood stereotypes. Here comes the wealthy stereotypes. Here comes the, you got to be a doctor. You've got a mom at home that made you study. Here come all those stereotypes. And so now, as race research has shown with regards to, say, housing, you go in to apply for a mortgage, or you just go in and ask to be shown housing. And not only are you being perceived as Black, but you're being perceived as, oh, this person looks immigrant Black. Here come all those kind of more quote unquote positive model minority stereotypes, or this person looks like they are slave descent Black, or just Black, just American Black. And here come those stereotypes. You probably come from a broken home. You've got bad credit. So all of these stereotypes are baked into the racial perception. But the racial perception itself has those axes of gender, has those axes of ethnicity. And so those are perpetuating the inequality.
So specifically, because not always, but a lot of times, especially this season, right, we're talking about economic outcomes. And like you mentioned, the reality of it is, though, that there are economic differences for different types of Black people in this country, right? If you look at wealth and income data, it's true that Nigerian Americans tend to have higher income levels and tend to have higher wealth levels than Black Americans. That's just what the data show us. And so I'm wondering, how do we parse that out? How do we look at that and understand why that's the case without sort of trafficking in these tired tropes of all the things you just said, right? Of how Nigerians and Black Americans might be different. Because I sort of, as I'm emerging as a scholar, I want to be able to acknowledge that these differences exist, but I don't want to be like somebody thinking I'm xenophobic or I'm doing something else other than trying to say, this is what the data show, but why?
Well, one way we can look at it, two ways we can look. We can look historically or contemporaneously. Historically, we have to remember that Nigerians, Ghanaians, Kenyans were only able to immigrate to the United States after the Civil Rights Movement, because prior to that, the Hart-Keller Act said you must be a white person eligible for citizenship to move to this country. So they were only able to come more recently. Now, in addition to that history, so the Hart-Keller Act's over, people are able to start coming again. Or that was the act that allowed non-whites to be able to immigrate to the US. That was about sometime in the mid-60s. Who do we think were the first kind of folks to come over here? It was going to be the folks who had the money, who had the education to either get student visas, to get work visas, to start coming over. So if we look historically at, if we're just going to stay with the example of Nigerians, just to make it easy with one nation, Nigerians immigrating to the United States came over with more money, came over with more education, came over with business background from, their other country, because that's who America allowed in, student visas, work visas. That's who we allowed in. But if we look at Black Americans at the same time, okay, so a Black American in the 1960s, right? That would be my grandma, an adult working in the 1960s. Her grandmother was enslaved. So we're trying to sit here and compare the grandchildren of slaves with, and expecting my grandma in South Carolina, where her grandmother was enslaved, to compete at the same level economically, to have the same amount of money economically as someone who has enough money to immigrate over to this country. Because again, I worked in study abroad for a while. You have to show you've got a certain amount to immigrate. Now, if you're coming as a refugee, that's different. Whole nother story over there. If you're coming as a refugee, but if you're just applying straight for, a work visa or a student visa, you do have to show bank account information. And so if we look historically, of course, there's going to be differences among groups. If one group 30 years ago was sharecropping and the other group has already more money in. So then now we think about, okay, well, now we're looking at the grandchildren, the next generation. So my generation, for example. And again, we know wealth is accumulated. We also know that poverty is accumulated and passed on generationally. So now if we're going to look contemporaneously, we can see that kind of history and that trajectory of how we all got to where we are. And so we all started at different places and therefore we're at different places. Now, the contemporary view also kind of looks at, okay, so we all started at different places, sure, but haven't things been done to help folks, kind of get all on the same level? Well, every time something like that comes up, there's backlash and it gets rolled back. So we tried to have affirmative action. Okay, that then got rolled back. So then we tried to have, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, no, that's getting rolled back. So yes, there are these differences, as you said, but even if we don't get to the level of individual social psychological stereotypes and how people are interacting one-on-one, at this group level, we see these big differences as well, simply because of that kind of history of economics and the fact that in this country, economics is so tied to, and in many countries, economics is tied to family because of inheritance laws, because, my parents were college educated, for example, so they were able to help me. It's much harder for first generation college students because we as a society rely on family and family background so much. And so again, if we have these differences, and I'm only going back to 65-ish, right? We could go back even further, but I'm just kind of talking about 65-ish when non-whites were able to immigrate to the United States again. If we have these original kind of differences and then we do nothing or we roll back efforts to try to help ameliorate the first inequality, then of course it's going to perpetuate, which of course, in my work, I argue that's the point. That's the point of rolling back DEI. That's the point of canceling affirmative action, is that for all of the talk that we say, there's large segments of society that do not want inequality, that do not want equality.
For sure. And I get so mad when I think about so a couple things. I get mad at people like our guest who likely had a grandmother who was maybe somewhere sharecropping, right? That
he said it.
And okay. So it's like, how can you come from that and then just sort of be like, oh, my people just didn't get the memo? Like, how can you just relegate us to boiling it down to as simple as we are just lazy and that's the reason why? But at the same time, admit that your mother had a job where she was making $15 an hour, even until maybe she died. Amber, did he have her making this low wage job until
she never had a high wage job, but she was able to accumulate wealth, I think, through her investment properties and things like that. But
right. She was buying a house in the 1990s in California when you can have $15 an hour and buy a house in California.
Or when you buy the house and then you benefit from the gentrification that comes subsequent to the purchase of the home, where there is a, very concerted effort to drive out the people who are native to that area, the Black and the brown people.
Yes.
Yes. And then you benefit, the few people who actually owned in those areas benefit from the gentrification because their equity explodes. And so, yes, I think though, what I wanted to talk about here and what I wanted to ask you about is you talk a lot in the book about the epistemology of ignorance. Because even as we're discussing this now, we can all recall examples where we see people who come here and, we say, oh, yes, this person had means in their country, but then they come here and they struggle because it is difficult to move to a different country. And so we say, well, this is proof that, life is hard for everybody. And if you just work hard and if you have a positive attitude, it's almost like we have emotional buy-in and emotional connections to these beliefs that are contradicted by facts. So talk to us about that epistemology of ignorance and why it is so important to understand that as we try to do the work of debunking these myths.
Oh, of course. So let me break down the term. It's a really erudite philosophy term, actually, not even sociology. So epistemology means study of knowledge. And so thinking about epistemology is thinking about how we know what we know. So how do we know something is true? What sort of data do we take as evidence? And then ignorance, of course, is things that are inaccurate or things that you don't know. So put together, the epistemology of ignorance is a knowledge-based or understanding system where what counts as true is actually either not true or from other ways of knowing, or is to refuse to find out the answer. So that other kind of understanding of ignorance there. And so this concept came from a philosopher who had written about the racial contract, where he says that within the society, white people kind of writ large, again, philosopher, hypothetically, not any kind of individual one, but white people writ large are agreeing to all say, okay, non-white folks that we are colonizing, that we are enslaving, are beneath us. We're going to all agree to ignore contradictory evidence. So my other line of research is on mixed race folks. And anyone with the background in animal husbandry will know that if you mix two animals that are not the same species, the offspring, if it's viable at all, is not going to be able to reproduce. But the fact that mixed race people are reproducing should have let early colonizers know that all humans are the same, right? But they had to ignore that if they wanted to take over the land. They had to ignore that if they wanted to continue to enslave people. And so as part of that racial contract was this epistemology of ignorance, where we're going to ignore walking, talking proof that what we're saying is inaccurate. And so with regards to these fallacies, all of the fallacies are rooted in that epistemology of ignorance. There's contradictory evidence out there, but to acknowledge that contradictory evidence would then break down the white supremacist system, or at least it would invalidate it to the point that more people would want to question it or to break it down. And so therefore that ignorance needs to be maintained. And so within the book, the epistemology is really focused on, in the first chapter, kind of that understanding, introduction, of course, getting on the same page. And then it's just briefly referred to throughout the rest of the book, in showing how the fallacies are this kind of function of ignorance.
It feels like we're living in the age of the epistemology of ignorance. Like, just seriously, everywhere around us, right? Like, and even to your point that you brought up about your students and how they're just like, no. Whatever you're saying, no, I've just refused to believe it, even when you present the facts in front of people. And so that's why I'm oftentimes left feeling very defeated, because I'm just not sure how do we fight back against people who are like, I absolutely and willingly do not want to know the truth. I don't want to acknowledge it. And like, what do we do? And of course, I'm not literally asking you to solve this problem, but just in your work, do you think about ways that we can fight when people are like, I'm willfully ignorant?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I'll say from a teacher perspective, and then from a just general kind of non-teacher perspective. From the teacher perspective, we can be really clear about our assignments and really clear about the pedagogical purpose of these assignments. So there's a sociologist who did a content analysis of her students' papers on home equity and on home ownership and home wealth. And one thing she found was that a lot of the white students would do parts 1, 2, and 3 of the assignment. And then when you get to that part 4, where it's, okay, now you've seen this kind of history of how your family got this house or whatever, how does that help you understand redlining or racism and housing or blah, blah, blah? She found that they wouldn't even do it. They just would take the L, take the lost points, they would take the lost points. They wouldn't even do it. I was teaching a theory class once, and I break my theory class down into different types of theorists, and they're kind of their collection, their kind of genre of theories. And I had a day on Black feminist theory. And out of the 5 football players that I had in that class, only 1 came to class that day.
Oh,
so
wow.
From a teacher perspective, we do have this difficulty because students will not want to do the work. And so one way that I've kind of tried to address that is, and I'm not saying other professors haven't, but is to tell the students what I call the pedagogical purpose of this assignment. Here's what this assignment is asking you to do. Because if we kind of think about pushbacks, I'm in Alabama. We just passed a law that's against DEI. It's nothing in that law that's actually DEI.
Y'all's governor is a peach. Let me tell you.
Yeah, bless her heart. So the law says that we can't indoctrinate folks. We can't force them to believe, these sorts of things, which none of which was going on.
Right.
But in so putting that into legislation in my state and others, what it tells us is, okay, this is how folks were feeling. They were feeling attacked. They were feeling, as we said, look up this assignment on your housing, and how your family has benefited. They were feeling like, oh, you're trying to make me feel guilty. This assignment is trying to make me feel bad about. So what I do is on the front end of the assignment, I say, here's the pedagogical purpose of this assignment. And sometimes, if I'm talking particularly to very conservative students, I would be like, this is not trying to make you feel guilty. Now, your feelings are your feelings. There are ways to work through your feelings, but the assignment is trying to show you the connection between historical patterns, laws, practices, and current levels of inequality. That's what the assignment's trying to do. And so, of course, not for everyone. We still have vaccine and climate change deniers. So no science is able to reach everyone. But I have found that as a teacher, saying this is the pedagogical purpose, this is the critical thinking skill, this is the transferable skill to your major that learning about racism can show. I have found that has helped some students be a bit more open, at least, to doing the assignment or coming to class on that day that they think would be pretty difficult. Outside of that, just out and about in the real world or online, my best friend actually gives one of the best ways to address this, and I talk about it briefly in the conclusion of the book. She will just stare and blink at people. So she's a white woman. I'm also here in Alabama, and people will make racist jokes in front of her or say, racist comments in front of her when they, just assume we're all white people here. We can say these things. And Bestie will just go. Like, she won't even do that little small laugh to make it comfortable. No, she lets it be uncomfortable. And even if that doesn't change the other person's mind, it plants a seed and lets them know that what you said is not universally accepted. It's not. And then also they won't say it around her anymore. But sometimes you're not going to be able to change people's views. Sometimes you're not going to be able to make them. And we have vaccine deniers and climate change deniers. We're not going to be able to have everyone understand or accept the truth. My great grandma died thinking the moon landing was faked. Like, people are going to believe what they want to believe. But what we can do as teachers is try various pedagogical strategies to reach them. And what we can do outside of that, just in our everyday lives, at the minimum, is let people know that view that you have is absolutely positively not universal.
No, I think that's really impactful and insightful, because one of the things that I've noticed that I lament deeply is how people wear ignorance as a badge of shame. I mean, as a badge of honor now.
Yes.
I remember when Dan Quayle not being able to spell potato was a disqualifying event, yes, right? Where we had just all collectively decided that we did not want to have an executive official in our country that could not spell potato. And now we have elected a potato head twice, who is celebrated for his gaps and his lack of knowledge and his,
brazen ignorance.
Yes, his willfulness in not knowing and not understanding, and still just sort of courageously saying things that have no basis in fact. And so what I'm wondering is, how do you suppose that we try to get buy-in for people who have started to believe that being ignorant is honorable somehow, Like, how
in
do
the age of the internet, no less, because
yes,
in the age of the internet, where fact checking is now going away. Have you seen the update from Meta?
Community notes,
community notes, no fact check.
Gone.
But do you know what
that is the $1 million question, Amber? That is the $1 million question.
The fact checkers are coming. They're moving to Dallas. I was like, so I just
why?
The shade of it all. They said they're moving the fact checkers from California to Dallas, and I'm like, I mean, are you trying to say people? Because we both live in Dallas Fort Worth, so I was like, it's just feeling like a little shade. Like, we're gonna have the community notes people in DFW where the bar for intellectual acumen is lower.
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. I do not have an answer, but I will say that we social scientists need to get on that immediately. And there are people, of course, working on it. My new book is out. Jennifer Mueller's work, she's at Skidmore. Her work is excellent on that. Kehinde Anji's in the United Kingdom. Psychosis of Whiteness, his work, is excellent in calling out these twisted ways of thinking, this ignorance, this clinging to the ignorance. So we're definitely going to need more work in this tradition. One thing I can say with regards to the experience of this, I completely agree with you with regards to you saying people wear this ignorance as a badge of honor. And so I have another research project that's currently in the analysis and writing up stage, where we used heart rate monitors to track the heart rate patterns of students in a math class doing math, and in sociology classes studying various topics, including racism. And what we find is that across the classes, students are having these kind of physiological responses when you're doing math and it's difficult, and also the same sorts of physiological responses when you're learning about racism and white privilege and white entitlement, and you're learning about these topics. However, my co-author and I, she's a mathematician, what we talk about in the article that we're preparing is how different society reacts to that emotional response. So if you have an emotional response, if you have a physiological response because you find math difficult, you can brag about that. I'm just not good at math. That's fine. Yeah, I'm not so good at math. Oh my gosh, I'm terrible at math. Ha ha ha. Like, you can brag about that. But with racism, with sociology, nobody's bragging like, I'm just terrible, I can't learn about white privilege. Like, that's not a thing. And then we see with the social structure, we have tutors, we have online math assessment, helps and assessments. We have structure in place for people who have a difficult time with math. We don't have any structure in place for people who have a difficult time learning about racism, learning about white privilege, learning about the history of colonialism, any of those sorts of things. And so we see, again, both at the individual level, but also at the structural level, as of now, there's not even support for people who would want to break out of that ignorance kind of level and learn more about it. It would be difficult, but we don't even have support for doing that. And so in the absence of that, it's kind of fatalistic to say, but can we blame people for not wanting to learn about a topic, engage with a topic that is going to be very difficult, and there's no support for them outside of, certain universities, certain schools that are still able to have these programs and be supportive?
Oh my gosh.
Even sorry.
I was just going to say, as you say that, I think back, because I was a political science major, but that is very true. In social science disciplines, the work assistance that you're offered is usually around helping you to be a better writer or a better processor of information, not to actually grapple with the information itself. That is so interesting.
Well, even the fact that you call it science, when many people don't think it is, right? So I think that we're not even starting at the same place. So to view sociology as a social science, first of all, for many people, is just not a serious endeavor. I actually have one of my friends pissed me off because she has a kid. She has a kid, and he's off at university studying, and so, but he's studying engineering or whatever. And she was like, yeah, this semester, we're really focusing on his GPA. So he's going to take some easy things like, and she goes, introductory sociology. And, and I was like, just way to talk about me in my face. But that's how people view it, right? Like, that's not a serious course. Yeah. That's just something that's a part of the core curriculum that you have to get over. And that's just really how we view these social problems in general, right? Like, we're not taking them seriously. We're not really thinking about, and I have such a hard time with my students, like, how do we really grapple with these issues? And people just don't want to. So I don't know.
But they also don't have support if they were. So let's say that your friend's son does take sociology, finds, like many students, that they need a tutor.
Call me. Follow me.
Put your number up on the screen. But at many universities, are there sociology tutors? Right.
No, they send you to the writing center.
Always going to find a math tutor. And so that at the institutional level is showing which subjects the institution acknowledges is difficult, values enough to hire, a tutor to have that available. And so then students see that the courses that don't have tutors, you're not going to think that they're that hard. If they were hard, then tutors would be a standing, kind of thing. I refer students to the counseling center, quite often, particularly as we're talking about racism, when we're talking about violence. I also teach sociology of sexuality. So obviously I, refer students to the counseling center there, but that is emotional processing,
Right.
not emotional and academic, the way, say, a math tutor, if you've got math anxiety, or public speaking, public speaking fears, right? That gets the emotional and the academic together. At least at my university and others that I'm familiar with, we don't have something as robust for social science. And people get that message and then, of course, write it off or say, well, I just don't want to bother with it.
So also, as we think about on this show, when we first started, one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to make a distinction between things that happen at micro and macro levels, right? Because oftentimes we all have a cousin that we can point to that's lazy and shiftless. Like we do, like it's just right. I might be the cousin. But anyway, we all have individuals that we can point to demonstrate that a certain thing is true or false. But if all the people around you are having this issue, then it has to be more than just everybody's lazy, everybody didn't get the memo. So in the book, you talk about the different levels that exist, the things that exist on the micro level, and the meso level, and the macro level. So can you talk to us about how racism functions at different levels, how we can attack it at those different levels?
Yeah, of course. So we've already briefly mentioned the individual level. That would be from a sociology and a psychology perspective. That's going to be your bigoted comments. That's going to be the stereotypes that one particular individual, is holding. And the way to address that, of course, is to confront the one individual. So your uncle gets drunk over Thanksgiving and starts talking about Mexicans, and you say, no, Uncle Johnny, XYZ, and you can confront that and you can have that discussion at the 101 level. The next level would be the meso level, meso meaning kind of middle. And that's going to be in sociology, more institutions. So here's where we hear about institutional racism, or we hear about, say, the bias in tracking in schools, or the difference in crack and cocaine in the criminal justice system, right? How that's racially coded. And so addressing those is going to take more, of course, than just one person having one conversation. So if we have tracking in schools and we're seeing that that is being very racially biased, addressing that might mean going to the PTA or PTA, parent-teacher organization or association, working with other parents, maybe, then talking to the school board. And so still an individual can kind of get it done. They're going to need others. And you're going to have to go to these kind of bodies that I mentioned, the PTA, the school board versus just Uncle Johnny. Another thing about the meso level is, again, since it's institutions, let's say that we get the tracking fixed at the school. Now it's going to be based on, not just teachers' assessment of who's great, but it's going to be also looking at homework, as well as the teacher's assessment, as well as test scores, as well as the parent's desire for the child, right? It'll take all of those things more holistically into account. And perhaps that will help, stop the racial bias, in tracking that was in this hypothetical school. That's great. The kids are then going to leave school, however, and still be driving while Black, still be shopping while Black, right? It didn't address other kind of areas, but it did address one, and obviously that is a huge win. The next level, the largest level that sociologists look at, is the macro level. So that's looking at the kind of nation as a whole. That's looking at, the society as a whole. And that's the one that historically has been changed with wars, with social movements, with large scale protests. And so this one is not just, I'm talking to Uncle Johnny. This one is not just, I'm petitioning for a change in policy to the school board. This one is,
we need a revolution.
Honestly, though, there we go. That's kind of the level. However, now, all of that said, in the conclusion of the book, I do talk about how these can actually all come together. And so you were saying, Erica, that and you're teaching, these topics, and you're trying to stay, positive, even though it seems, really difficult. And even though we know that revolution, that wars, that laws change, that is kind of the largest level. When we then again start peeling that back down, all of that is still socially constructed by actual individual humans. And so as a Tennessean, we've got a good bit that we can be proud of. I mean, not Andrew Jackson, not the Trail of Tears, but other things that a Tennessean, one thing that we Tennesseans can be proud of is with regards to the 19th Amendment in the United States. There it is, guaranteeing women the right to vote, the 19th Amendment. In our Constitution, you have to have so many states ratify the amendment before it then takes place. And so in Tennessee, they're getting ready to try to ratify it. And if Tennessee ratified it, that would be enough for it to become the law nationwide. And when they walked into the chamber to do it, it was one vote more for deny, not to pass it. And so everyone's like, oh no, we're not going to pass. We're not going to pass. And so then one man got one letter from his one mother, and he changed his vote to a yay, and the 19th Amendment passed. And so as Tennesseans, we're like, we passed women's right to vote because that one. So I know. So all of the levels came together, though. We had decades of social movements, of protest, of, decades of that macro level. We had decades of that meso level, women working in, for business, women working, to get changes to their, home conditions, that meso level. And then we also had that micro level, that one guy who changed it and that tipped the power, which then made Tennessee ratify it, which made the correct number for the whole nation. So all three levels are needed. So as we grapple with these, go into 25, into a new social media age of no fact checking, into a post-truth alternative facts era, when the new administration, kind of comes in, we're going to have to remember that to address this, it has to be at all three levels. Too often people only want to pick one level and only focus on their level, that one level, but we have to kind of think more broadly and not be like, well, why are they out there in the streets marching? What we really need to be doing is getting the school board to change this. Well, what you really need to be doing is calling out your cousin when they say something. You're just sitting there smiling at them. We need all of it, right? We need all of it.
As Amber usually says, I receive that. I receive that. But you're talking about history, and then we were also talking about DEI. And I do get frustrated with people when they are like, why can't we just? Because a lot of times it's ignoring the historical realities that we have in this nation as Black people when we've tried to just do a thing. So I would like us just to talk sort of in the last few minutes about these DEI rollbacks and how quickly they have happened, at least in my understanding, in comparison to some other things. So if I look at affirmative action, and I am sort of in many ways a baby of affirmative action. My mother, who went to college in the 1960s, got her job at the post office and then the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, likely as a result of affirmative action, right? I went to university on what we would now call an affirmative action scholarship that was set aside for Black, Hispanic, and Native students, right? And maybe 3 years after I started university, those affirmative action policies were cut in our state. And so I'm thinking about this window of probably like 25 years, right? Where affirmative action was allowed to stand and be the law of the land. And then I'm looking at DEI. And I'm looking at DEI more recently, let's say in the past decade, and then how everything amped up so quickly with the murder of George Floyd, right? When everybody was like, DEI, we're all in. And just this past week, if it hasn't been McDonald's saying, I'm done with my DEI, and Meta saying, I'm done with my DEI, and everybody else, except the only article I saw is Costco saying they've done with their DEI. And so, but it's like the windows of opportunity keep getting smaller as I'm just sort of looking at them. What insight do you have in this? Because again, I feel like I want to keep fighting, but now my opportunities are smaller as I'm thinking about what's available for my children.
I think the seeds of that answer lie in exactly what you said. Your mother benefited and then you benefited. That gets back to that generational thing.
For sure.
That generational thing. And so in stopping affirmative action and stopping DEI shorter than the length of a generation, because DEI has not been, it was stopped so much shorter. It wasn't a whole generation. Yeah. You cut off that intergenerational transmission. And so stories like yours, the goal is to not have stories like yours, to not have this intergenerational upward mobility for slave descent Black Americans, right? We and reservation bound Native Americans are supposed to stay at the bottom. Like that is the kind of hierarchy, within our society. And so cutting off programs, once we see that they had this intergenerational, because we see affirmative action was not cut off right after your mom. No. It was cut off after your generation when it showed, oh, wait, oh, no, oh, look, this is what's going on. Then it was cut off. Then DEI started. And before it could even get going good, it's like, no, we don't. So it's like 2 steps forward, but also then 3, the three steps back. but with the goal, or if not the conscious goal, because I mean, are they really sitting around a smoky table understanding all of this or not, is of course a question.
I kind of believe they are. I mean,
they might be. They might be. I mean, Hitler's final solution was developed around a smoky table. So, they could be. But even if not, the function of it is still going to come out to be the same. Like you said, what opportunities are going to be for your children, for Amber's children, for my daughter. And that is the goal, to stop this kind of forward movement. And then tying in my book, these fallacies float freely within the society in order to justify the status quo, to blame those that it's doing, to hide, to cover up and hide that they're doing this. It is so crazy in my state that we try to ban, they said critical race theory. They did an audit. There was one critical race theory in the entire state of Alabama. It was an elective at the law school, but they banned critical race theory in Alabama. And that was so just mind-blowing, because critical race theory teaches how racism is embedded within the law. So you're actually doing critical race theory. You're doing what critical race theory talks about right now. You're using the law to prop up racism. Like, it was just sitting here in the state when that was going on was kind of mind-blowing. But you can understand if the goal, if the desire, if the entitlement is that these people will be on top, these folks will be in the middle, and these people will be at the bottom. If that is what one sees as the way things kind of should be, and making laws in order to be that way, then stopping that intergenerational transmission means that a few tokens are always able to make it. We can then point to them and be like, see, they made it, why didn't you? And the status quo of majority oppression can remain and look legitimate.
I also just want to say that is historical by design. Like, when you were talking about, I don't know if they were sitting around the dusty room, like when affirmative action ended, like Nixon literally sat in a smoky room and invented like Black capitalism to gaslight people into thinking that affirmative action was not necessary. And so, if you can sort of simultaneously push this idea of welfare queens while you're telling people that if you just work harder and smarter, you too can be a Black capitalist and have the American dream, it is diabolical. Like, so when you talk about people's emotional connections to their own ignorance and to inaccurate beliefs, like that is probably the greatest marketing scheme of all time. Like, and when you think about it, because I was listening to Erica talk, like, I think I'm right after you, but I came along with that generation of this expectation that, if you want to go to college, it is your responsibility to pay for it. It is your responsibility. You either need to do well enough to earn a scholarship, but if you go out here and you get these student loans and you default on them, you are stealing. That is what people are. You are stealing. And if you give somebody your word that you're going to pay them back, and you get your benefit of the bargain and you don't give them theirs, that is stealing. And it took me a very long time to realize, like, oh my gosh, what a scam.
You let America tell you were stealing and you believed it. Like, you are crazy.
But America loves to tell Black people we're stealing education. Did y'all hear about that? The homeless woman who used her friend's address for her son. She was homeless, used her friend's address for her son to go to school versus the homeless shelter. And then she got convicted of stealing education.
She got charged. Yes, she did. Yes,
because
she
sent her son to a better school than he should have gone to. I'm like,
I also used my grandmama's address to go to school and lied.
So did I.
and broke the law to go to school.
Look, I asked if I could, and my mama said no.
So yeah, I just wanted to sort of bring that up, because I think part of the reason why, even now when we exist in sort of this Instagram generation where folks are just told that if they will start a business, if they will hustle in their free time, if they will, put energy and time behind a belief that they can do anything. I was listening to something the other day and I heard a guy say, he's like, nobody has an excuse for not knowing how to do anything, because you can learn anything on YouTube. If you want to do real estate investing, you can't hide behind the fact that you don't have money, because you can learn how to invest on YouTube. You can learn how to do anything on YouTube. And so it's almost like we traded one thing for another, where now we have all of these images coming out and inundating people every day. And so the expectation placed on people is that, like, well, if you ain't shit, it's because you don't want to be shit. You know, if you ain't doing nothing with your life, it's because you don't want to, because we have made people believe that because they have a smartphone in their hand, that they could be simultaneously genius and enterprising and wealthy all at the same time, because everything you need is at your fingertips.
I want to fight people who believe this, because education does not happen by yourself.
No.
You
Thank
are
you.
not well educated by going to YouTube and watching videos. Education happens in community. That's why many of my students come thinking, like, with this idea of, I did the research. You didn't do the research. You watched
You did
the
a
video.
Google search.
Yes.
You did a Google search.
If you did, if you did that, you asked ChatGPT, you didn't do any research. And we need to stop it. American individualism is a scourge, and I am mad.
Yeah, I love that you brought up this social media generation, because another analogy that I like to use in my classes with regards to the social structure is the analogy to the algorithm. So if you go on to Instagram and you're scrolling, you're going to see these advertisements for, oh, do you have such low views? Do you have low views on your reels? Do you want to go viral? Do you want to, what is it called? Like user generated content and make money? You want to monetize your Instagram? Follow these 5 steps. And then you follow the 5 steps and like, it doesn't work. And they then, it's like, oh, well, you're not working hard enough. Or there's a whole algorithm that is obscured, and it's not like Meta will be like, here is the algorithm. Reels are going to get shown to this many of your followers. If this percentage of them clicks on it and looks at it, it will then show it to this percentage of non-followers. They're not going to be that transparent with the algorithm. And that's going to keep people posting and just chasing their tails. And so I get really frustrated. I've watched a couple webinars that have talked about this because I do the social media for my department. And I didn't know anything about doing social media marketing. So I'm like, let me find a webinar. Let me find some information on this. And it's really frustrating because it just keeps saying, well, if you're not going viral, it's because your content's not good enough. And I'm like, but there's an algorithm. And you're not telling me how the algorithm works. I'm just supposed to keep trying things. And then if something hits and, gets a lot of views. So the video that I posted on Thursday, a little short reel from my office, it got 3 times as many views as the previous kind of reels I posted. So I guess I'm supposed to like look at that and try to deduce what I did that time that got to be seen more times. I mean, or you could be just transparent about the algorithm, right? But like the society, the social structure is the algorithm.
Yes.
And we ignore that the algorithm exists and makes it seem like it's just all 100% us. And it's not.
Right. And we know that, shout out to Dr. Sophia Noble, that the algorithm is racist.
Yes. And the algorithm is racist. I have to keep telling my daughter that. She loves to, look up, hair care and beauty products, but she's got curly type 3 hair. And I said, please put in, African-American, put in Black, put in Afro, put in some different search. Because if you just say cute hairstyle, you're going to see a whole bunch of straight, hairstyles. It's not going to be made, for you, because the algorithm's not made for you. So I'm having to like teach my 10-year-old to understand this algorithm, because she was trying these styles when I first started letting her be on, on Instagram. She was trying these hairstyles and they weren't coming out nicely. And she was frustrated. And I said, well, you don't have the type of hair, sweetie. Like this basic search the algorithm wasn't for you. You need to kind of put in some more keywords that'll make you be like, oh, okay, yeah, she wants some Black stuff.
Well, Dr. Sims, I just want to thank you for joining us today. It has been a delight to talk to you. Thank you for talking to us about your book. But tell the people where they can find you on the interwebs, and tell them, where they can find your book.
Yes, of course. So I am mainly on Instagram.
Don't be shy. Put it up so that people can see. Yeah.
Here's the new book. Screenshot. So I am mainly on Instagram at Jenny 2_ PhD. So I do have a Twitter X account. I'm not over there that much. So find me over on Instagram, on LinkedIn at Jen Sims. My nickname's over on LinkedIn. And what else it was just internet. That my email is
where can
my
they
full name.
Where can they find the book?
Oh, the book. So the book is on all major sellers. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. The publisher is Polity. It is also available as an audiobook on Audible or audiobooks.com. Those are all of the places I would order online, just kind of depending on where you are. It is not in the bookstore, like in Barnes & Noble in my city. So most people have been ordering them online, kind of getting back to that whole epistemology of ignorance and the nation being happy to be ignorant. Difficult to find social science books just on the shelf at Barnes & Noble, oftentimes, unless, again, obviously Sophia Nobles and Dr. Ruha Benjamin, like superstars, those would be there. But like those of us that just published it a couple months ago, they're not there
but also
yet,
a superstar.
So.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You are a broker, so now you're a friend to the show. So next time you have a book that comes out, or next time we want to talk to you, don't act like you don't know us. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Amber, what homework? Do you have homework for the brokers,
what?
or they're not having homework because the weather is bad all around the country? But by the time the show airs, the weather won't be bad though.
But you know what I felt in my spirit while I was listening to the audiobook? You know what we haven't done in a long time? I feel a giveaway in my spirit. And I think we need to give away some copies of Dr. Sims' book. So I think we should give away 5 copies of the book. But the homework that you have to do is you have to tag somebody that is not a broker in the comments. And you have to tell them that they need to be a follower of Brokish. And so if you tag somebody in the comments who is not a broker, we will enter you in a drawing, and we're going to give away 5 copies of the book after this episode airs. So the homework is you need to be out here evangelizing so your friends don't be getting caught up in the Wookiee on Instagram thinking that they need to go to YouTube University so they can be millionaires. Okay.
But we do want the folks who watch the show on YouTube still to go to Instagram and tag your friends. So you also can still participate. You just got to go on over to the IG to do that. But certainly feel free to do that. Yes. Thank you for suggesting that. So brokers, y'all know that we know and you know that racism works on a whole bunch of different levels. And we have to, as is the Black story, right? We got to fight a lot of different fights on a lot of levels. And I know it can be tiresome. And I'm speaking myself right now. I know you can feel defeated. But at the end of the day, if we are moving towards revolution, we cannot be tired by these things that are happening in our lives. We have to stay focused on our future and where we want to go. So we just want to encourage you in the fight, whether the fight is on the lowest level or the highest level. We want to encourage you today as we're encouraging ourselves. So stay in the fight. Thanks for tuning in. We look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of Brokish.
All right, good people. Thanks for listening to Brokish. For more episodes, visit us at brokish.com or subscribe, and Brokish will get direct deposited into your favorite podcast app on the 1st and 15th. Share Brokish with your friends and join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Music for Brokish is Come Get Some by Blank and Kit. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.